We are going to take a quick pause here, and this is sort of a bit of a long time coming for me studying this chapter called Deuteronomy 32. And here's how I want to whet your appetite for Deuteronomy 32. And if you have a Bible, you can open it up to Deuteronomy 32. But here's how I want to whet your appetite. I heard a Bible teacher recently say this. They said, if you want to understand the apostles, and think particularly of Paul, because a lot of the New Testament was written by the Apostle Paul. A lot of how we do church and theology is kind of revolves around a lot of what Paul said. If you want to understand Paul, this Bible teacher said you have to understand what Jesus was saying. You have to. Because he doesn't have new revelation. He's just basing what he's saying on Jesus and the theology of Jesus. And if you want to understand Jesus, you have to understand the prophets. Because Jesus was in line with the prophets, hand in glove. Like, he wasn't being like, yeah, I know Isaiah said that, but we're totally changing it up, right? He wasn't doing that. He literally was just commentating, albeit in a very powerful way, because he was the greater prophet, right? And what Isaiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Malachi, you name the prophet, it's based on the prophets. And if you want to understand the prophets, you have to understand the Torah. And the Torah is the foundation of everything. Not just the foundation of our fellow Jews who don't believe in Jesus, it's their foundation, but it's also our foundation for those who believe in Jesus as the Messiah. It is the first 5 books of what we call the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Torah is our foundation, and it's so critical. And this Bible teacher said, if you're going to understand the prophets, you have to understand the Torah. And he kind of said Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy, in a sense, at least he says, is sort of like a compounding of Leviticus, Exodus, and Numbers. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. And then he even focused it more and said, if you want to have an idea and a framework of how to read the Bible, Deuteronomy 32 is your map. So does that not whet your appetite? It whetted my appetite. I was like, Deuteronomy 32, what's that? Like, I was like, I thought you were going to say Romans 8 or something cool. But no, and Romans 8 is amazing. But like Deuteronomy 32, like what is it about Deuteronomy 32 that like everything is sort of based on this? So that's just a bit of a whetting your appetite. In a moment here, I'm going to ask my brother Richard to come up, and he's going to read it. And it's a long chapter, and he's going to read it for us, and we're just going to let the scripture go forth. Okay, so we'll take a little bit of time, but I'm encouraging us to listen well. But let me just give a brief bit of context so that when he begins to read it out, you will have just something in your mind to be like, okay, this is that, okay? Deuteronomy as a book of the Bible, is really something kind of semi-recently that's been discovered about the book of Deuteronomy by scholars and historians, is that it's written as an ancient treaty covenant covenant treaty, okay? You know what I'm saying? Between two parties. So in the ancient times, you'd have two parties that come into covenant and have a treaty together, and those treaties would have certain things. They would have a little bit of a preamble, a little bit of the history of the relationship between the two parties, and then you'd have stipulations and laws, and then you'd have curses and blessings depending if the parties continued in the stipulations and the laws. If they disobeyed, there'd be curses. If they obeyed, there'd be blessings. And then at the end, you'd have witnesses. So that idea of an ancient covenant treaty text is what actually Deuteronomy is. So Deuteronomy is an ancient treaty not about Isaac. It's actually about Yahweh and Israel. That's what Deuteronomy is all about. It's actually an ancient covenant treaty between the God of Israel and his people, Israel. So this is kind of what it's about. Now, Deuteronomy 32, near the latter end of the book, is actually going to be in the witnesses section, and we're going to see that in just a moment. It's part of the witnesses. He's calling forth the heavens and the earth to witness this covenant that God is making with Israel. So that's a bit of the context of the actual book in and of itself, just very brief. Now, in terms of the historical context, this is very important too. Deuteronomy really is like one massive sermon that Moses gives to the thousands of second-generation Israelites on the brink of the Jordan River before they head into the Promised Land. So some of us might remember, if you're still new to kind of the Old Testament story of Israel, Hebrew Bible story of Israel, Israel was in captivity in Egypt, right, for hundreds of years, 400 and whatever, 50 years, 430 years or whatever it is exactly, some years. And God sent Moses to redeem them. They come through, they pass through the Red Sea, right? And they're right on the edge, Kadesh Barnea, right on the edge of the promised land. They send in the scouts and the spies. You remember the story. And Caleb and Joshua come back, 2 of the 12 spies, and say, this land is awesome. Look at the fruit. They're huge. Like, this is awesome. We got this. We can go in and take it because God says it's ours. The other 10 spies, how did they respond? They trembled. Their knees were knocking because they're like, there's giants in the land. And that's not metaphor. There's actually like 13-foot guys in the land. And we're like grasshoppers. Like, they're going to squish us, right? So they are terrified. They cause the whole community of Israel to fear. It's amazing how one person's fear can actually permeate other people's fear, right? It's true. Joshua and Caleb are like, no way, we got this. But it prevailed. The fear prevailed. It overtook of all Israel. And Israel says, no, we're not going to go. Well, God did not like that, obviously, and he led them 40 years in the desert, literally just basically doing circles. Now, he is providing for them, he's helping them, whatever, but their judgment is that they would not enter the promised land. It would be their children that would enter. So fast forward 40 years, you're now at the edge of the Jordan River with all of the children that are now grown-ups with their children, and Moses is about to die. He's 120 years old. Okay, and yet his eye has not dimmed. He's still fit man. And he's 120. He's like, okay, I got a sermon for you all, right? Gets them all to sit down, and he preaches Deuteronomy. And basically what it is, it's a reaffirmation of the law and of the covenant that God had made with their fathers, because it's their covenant too. So that's sort of the historical context. Does that make sense? So when Richard reads this in a moment, actually think in your mind Moses, 120 years old, standing there, all of these Israelites looking at him, and he's declaring this over them before they enter into the promised land. Now, before Richard reads, I want to give a tiny bit of the actual immediate context of specifically Deuteronomy 32. We got the greater context of Deuteronomy. We have the closer context of the historical context of Deuteronomy, but now the closer context of exactly Deuteronomy 32. I've already told you that this is in the section of the witnesses. He's already gone over the stipulations with them. He's gone over how they need to obey. He's gone over the blessings in which, if they actually obey the covenant, these are going to be your blessings. He goes over the intensity of the curses that they would experience if they don't. But then, and this is very important, on top of all this, Moses has also already prophetically spoke of Israel's future disobedience. He's saying, look, you are going to go in the land and you are not going to keep this. I want you to hear this because it's very powerful. This is in Deuteronomy 31, verse 16. The Lord said to Moses, behold, you are about to lie down with your fathers. You're going to die. Then this people will rise and whore after their foreign gods among them in the land that they are entering. And they will forsake me, and they will break my covenant that I have made with them. Then my anger will be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them and hide my face from them, and they will be devoured. And many evils and troubles will come upon them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil that they have done, because they have turned to other gods. Verse 19, now therefore, write this song. So this is why we needed to read that. I know that was intense, but the reason why we had to read that is because God is telling Moses, therefore, because that is to come, write this song down. You're going to be a songwriter now, okay? Write this song down and teach it to the people Israel. Put it in their mouths that this song may be a witness for me against the people of Israel, so that when these curses come upon them, they can't look at me and say, look, God, you're such a bad God. He would say, no. You are only experiencing the curses in which you have come into covenant with me. Verse 20, for when I have brought them into the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to give to their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and they have eaten and are full and grown fat, they will turn to other gods and they will serve them, and they will despise me and break my covenant. And when many evils and troubles have come upon them, this song, the song that we're going to sing in a moment, shall confront them as a witness, for it, the song, will live unforgotten in the mouths of their offspring. For I know what they are inclined to do even today, because before I have brought them into the land that I swore to give. So Moses wrote this song the same day, and he taught it to the people of Israel. So there's the immediate context of this song. So it's heavy, right? It's not going to be, top 10 worship hits, because of the purposes behind it, but it is a witness against Israel when they rebel in the land. Does that give a bit of a context now? Okay. Richard, why don't you come up and would you please read this section for us?
I'm going to hold the mic if you don't mind.
Yeah, please do.
I'm so thankful for Deuteronomy 31:30, the verse before 32 starts, because I would not be singing this for you and you would not enjoy it. It says here in 31:30, then Moses spoke the words of this song until they were finished in the ears of all the assembly of Israel. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distills as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass and like showers upon the herb. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to the God. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children, because they are blemished. They are a crooked and a twisted generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, you foolish and senseless people? Is not your Father who created you, who made you and established you? Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. He found him in the desert land, and in the howling waste of the wilderness. He encircled him, he cared for him, he kept him as the apple of the eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them on its pinions. The Lord alone guided him, no foreign gods with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and he ate the produce of the field, and he suckled him with honey out of the rock, and oil out of the flinty rock, curds from the herd, and milk from the flock, with fat of lambs, rams of Bashan, and goats, with the very finest of the wheat, and you drank foaming wine made from the blood of grapes. But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You gave fat, stout and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him, and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw it and spurned them because of the provocation of his sons and his daughters, and he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see that their end will be. For they are a perverse and generation, children in whom is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous with what is no God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. So I will make them jealous with those who are not people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. For a fire is kindled by my anger, and it burns to the depths of Sheol, devours the earth and its increase, and sets on fire the foundations of the mountains. And I will heap disasters upon them. I will spend my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger and devoured by plague and poisonous pestilence. I will send the teeth of beasts against them with the venom of things that crawl in the dust. Outdoors the soul shall bereave, and indoors terror. For young men and women alike, the nursing child with the man of gray hairs. I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will wipe them from the human memory, had I not feared provocation from the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is triumphant. It was not the Lord who did this. For they are a nation void of counsel, and there is no understanding in them. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would discern their latter end. How could one have chased 1,000 and two have put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them and the Lord had given them up? For their rock is not as our rock, our enemies are by themselves. For vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of poison, their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of serpents and the cruel venom of asps. Is not this laid up in store with me, sealed up in my treasuries? Vengeance is mine, and recompense for the time when their foot shall slip. For the day of their calamity is at hand, and their doom comes swiftly. For the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants, when he sees that their power is gone, and there is none remaining, bond nor free. Then he will say, where are their gods, the rock in which they took refuge? Who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offering? Let them rise up and help you. Let them be your protection. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill, and I make alive. I wound, and I heal, and there is none that can deliver out of my hand. For I lift up my hand to heaven and swear, as I live forever, if I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand takes hold of judgment, I will take vengeance on my adversaries and will repay those who hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh, with the blood of the slain and the captives from the long-haired heads of the enemy. Rejoice with him. O heavens, bow down to him, all gods, for he avenges the blood of his children and takes vengeance on his adversaries. He repays those who hate him and cleanses his people's land.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. As you can see, this is an intense scripture. There's lots there. And obviously, we won't be able to touch everything, but we are going to go over this because I believe that as disciples of Jesus, that are obviously, from the moment this was actually first given to that second generation of Israel, many, many years ago, I believe that even so, even though it's so ancient, this song, as it was said earlier, this unforgotten song is a witness against Israel, also ought to be a song for us who I'm assuming are primarily not Israel in this room, primarily Gentiles. It's a song that we also ought to sing, and I'm saying that kind of metaphorically, the song that we ought to consider, because there are at least three things that the song produces in us as disciples of Jesus in this 21st century that I believe are critical for a healthy discipleship. And I'll leave you hanging on what those are until we get to the end. But I'll just say that now as we go through it. There's three critical things that I believe that are going to be essential for our discipleship that we'll come to at the end. So let's jump into this and understand it because, there are things in there that are quite extreme, and we need to understand these things, especially if that one Bible teacher is right and says you have to understand this to understand the Bible. It's like, how, what? So let's get into this. He begins in verses 1 through 4. I'm going to kind of break it in chunks. I'm not going to reread it, by the way. Just chunks I'll reread. But the first chunk from verses 1 through 4, I'm just going to read verse 3 here. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. This is very important. Moses wants Israel to begin to sing in such a way that they know that whatever is going to be spoken in the song, whatever is going to be sung in the song is going to be is a description of who our God is. He's proclaiming God by proclaiming this song. I heard this recently, and it was really helpful. God did not, his first choice in us worshiping him, not his first choice is just giving a list of his attributes, and we're just like, God, you are so great, you're all-knowing, you're this, you're this, you're this. Those things mean nothing unless they're in a story. I could go up to Lance, I'm just going to pick on you, Lance, and say, Lance is a good guy, smart, da-da-da-da-da. That doesn't mean anything until I actually tell you a story that causes him for those things to actually come out. That's obvious, right? So when a story is involved, then God receives ascription to who he is, the ascribing of him greatness and his all-knowingness and so on and so forth. It has to be within the context of the story. Does that make sense? Right? So at the very beginning here, he says, I'm going to proclaim to you the name of the Lord. Ascribe greatness to our God. Well, he doesn't just then list attributes and say, there, your song's done. He now describes a story in which the greatness of God and the description of the God of Israel, Yahweh, actually comes to fruition. Does that make sense? So he begins that way. So no matter what we have already heard from Richard in this song, and no matter what we read again, it all comes back to this is who our God is. We have the temptation today to create God in our own image. You've probably heard that before. This is how I feel God should be. Da, 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 da. And that's who we worship. But that's a false God. We have to allow the God of Israel to proclaim who he is to us, and then we have the decision with our free will to worship him or not. So here we have God saying, here's an opportunity for you to know who I am. And he declares that. And I love verse 4 because verse 4 begins really with like a list of attributes which he's now going to expose for them through actual history. So look at verse 4. The rock, his work is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. Is that not an amazing description of our God? Like, that is an amazing verse. He's our rock. His work is perfect, not it's all right. No, it's perfect. All of his ways are justice. Just and upright is he. Faithful, without sin. There are things that Richard has read, and we're going to read again, which could cause someone with little knowledge of the Bible to say, that can't be God. God would never do that. And yet here at the very beginning, Moses wants to remind us that everything God does, in his covenant with Israel, in his love for us, everything he does is just. Everything he does is righteous. Everything he does is good. That's very important that we have that in our minds before we actually see those things presented in this song when he begins to get into a little bit of more detail. Okay, the next section is verses 5 and 6. We're met with this unnamed group who, I'll give you a hint now, it's Israel. Okay, this unnamed group, and perhaps it's unnamed. This is just a guess. It's unnamed because when Moses says to all Israel, hey, I'm going to teach you guys a song that you have to remember, right? And if he right away starts saying, Israel, you've dealt corruptly with God, they might get a little offended because they're people like us. So perhaps he begins by not stating their name right away and just says, there's a people, and they're going to deal corruptly with God. And Israel's like, I wonder who those people are, you know? Maybe that's why, until he finally feeds them and saying, that's actually you, right? Some of you remember David, King David. He did a horrible thing, right? He committed adultery with Bathsheba. Then he killed Bathsheba's husband. Really, really wicked, right? And then Nathan, the prophet, comes up to David and gives a parable. Remember the parable of a rich man and a poor man? The poor man had this lamb that he loved and cared for, and the rich man had some friends come over and says, I don't want to kill any of my lambs. Let's kill the poor man's sheep and feed it. So he takes them and he kills it. And when Nathan the prophet tells that to David, David gets enraged. He's like, how could that rich man do that? And then the famous line is Nathan says to him, you are that man. You did that. Perhaps the same thing is going on. This unnamed group Israel's hearing about dealing corruptly with God. They're blemished. They're a crooked and twisted generation. They're like, yikes, that doesn't sound good. And then finally, Moses is like, you are that people. So you can obviously see the contrast right away. A good, faithful, righteous God, all his ways are just, and all of a sudden in verses 5 and 6, we have the total opposite. A people who are blemished, acting corruptly, twisted, crooked, generation, foolish, and senseless. And yet listen to this emotion here. Halfway through verse 6, Moses says, is not he your father? Here's a hint now. Our father? Is he not your father who created you, who made you, who established you? The next section, verses 7 through 14, and it begins now with Moses telling them, remember the days of old. And what he does here is he begins to speak to them about the actual history of God's relationship with Israel And it's the history that proves and bears evidence for God's faithfulness to them, his love for them, his provision for them, his protection for them. I'm just going to pick out some spots, but like verse 10, he encircled them. He cared for him, that is Israel. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Verse 12, the Lord alone guided him. And we also see the purity of Israel at the beginning. No foreign god was with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land. And he goes on to explain the food that they ate and all this. And we can remember this, even in the wilderness period, God was giving them bread from heaven. He was giving them quail. He didn't let their sandals, wear out. He was with them and guided them. What you see here is God that is faithful to his people, that is showing protection and provision over them. But he really begins, I was kind of skipping a little bit, he really begins by saying their origin as the people of God. And that's in verses 8 and 9. I'm going to read this because this is a powerful two verses. Verses 8 and 9 says this, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind. Now, let's pause there for a moment. Does anyone think of a story in Genesis that kind of rings a bell? Dividing the people. Yeah, Tower of Babel, right? Genesis 10, 11, 12 are three really important chapters to understand the Torah and the rest of the Bible, right? Genesis 10, you have what's called the Table of Nations, right? After the flood, the Moses, who likely wrote Genesis, listed these nations that were divided in their own languages, in their own geographical locations around the whole world, right? They're divided. Genesis 11 kind of takes a step back for a moment and says, because before that division of the Table of Nations, they were all one in the land of Shinar, and they were being kind of wicked. They made this big ziggurat temple to worship on top of, trying to make a name for themselves. They all had the same language. What does God do? He comes down, right, Tower of Babel, confuses their language, right, and sets them apart. So they couldn't work together because they didn't understand each other, and he separates them. And then what happens at the very beginning of Genesis 12? He calls a man. The context of the call of Abraham, who is the father of Israel, the context of the calling and the election of Israel is all of the nations scattered. And he says, I'm going to choose this nation, this Israel here, to bless and bring back a restoration for the whole world. That is going to be the key and the solution to the judgment that I've given to the world of splitting them all up. I'm going to call a nation in context to the Table of Nations. So you can see that that's what Moses is referring to here. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Now this verse, whether you knew it or not, has been the source of much debate and interpretational difficulties for the last however many long, okay? What could be saying here, which I'm inclined to believe, is that the sons of God here, your translation might say the sons of Israel, but the sons of God here is likely referring to the divine council, the angelic beings that are with God in the heavenly places, right? Lowercase g gods. And could be the case here that when he divides up the world, he actually allots a different angelic being or God over the different nations, which would explain the fact that there are geographical places in the world that have their gods, right? In different places all over, and they have their gods. And remember, if you've been with us in our series through Acts, twice now, Paul has told the pagan peoples, like in Lystra and then again in Athens, he said, yeah, there was a time when God just sort of let you do your thing. Right? He did. He's like, God lets you do it, right? But now, since the Messiah has come, now's the time to repent, to turn away from your Zeus and your Apollo and your pagan entities, to remove yourself from those gods that were first allotted to you, and to trust in the God of Israel. It's fascinating. But see here, he says this, when God divided up all the different nations and gave them their gods, then read verse 9. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. Do you get that? God divided up mankind, gave them gods, but Israel, God is saying, is my people. I'm going to be their God. The other nations, they went about their own ways. I gave them what they wanted as part of their judgment. They get to have these other gods. I'm choosing Israel. I'm choosing Israel. Now, there's similar language earlier on in Deuteronomy. I just want to read this, Deuteronomy 4. You don't have to turn there if you don't want to, but Deuteronomy 4, listen to this language, because this isn't just a weird verse that says, yeah, Isaac, I think you're just like pulling this out. This is what God is saying to Israel. In Deuteronomy 4, verse 19, listen to what he says. And beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven. He's talking to Israel here. Beware lest you raise your eyes to the skies. And when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, which represented, gods, still do in some tribal peoples today, all the host of heaven, beware that you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, so that the Lord your God is, things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. Did you hear that language? God's allotted those things to the peoples, not to you, Israel. That's for the peoples, not to you. This is in my Bible. I don't know if it's in yours, but it's here. Verse 20, but, this is just like 8 and 9 in our passage, but the Lord has taken you, Israel, and he's brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance as you are this day. Are we tracking there? God has chosen Israel as his people, and all the other peoples have their other sons of God. Now, this is very important. God did not choose Israel. He did not choose Abraham in Genesis 12 because he's like, well, these table of nations here, I don't really like this one. They look weird. I don't like these people. They this, they that. Israel, they look great. I like them. We know clearly that God shows no partiality. There is no favoritism with God. This is sometimes hard for us to grasp, but I've been preaching it for a while now, so hopefully it's starting to sit in our minds. God chose Abraham and his descendants because of his love for the world. God elected Israel because he loves me. Isn't that kind of a weird concept? God chose Israel as his firstborn because he wants to bless all of his children. This is clear. Go back to the moment when God calls Abraham and his descendants in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. You guys know what he says. I'm choosing you to bless you, to give you everything, so that what? Through you, all the families of the earth, all those table of nations in Genesis 10 are going to be blessed through you guys and through your king, who is going to be Jesus, the Messiah. You're going to find the blessing from God through Israel. I guarantee that whenever we read, let's say you're reading in Matthew chapter 3, and you get to the baptism of Jesus. And you remember what happens, right? Jesus is baptized by John. He brings up Jesus from the baptism of the Jordan. And what happens? The skies open, and a voice says what? This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Do you ever read that and say, hey, I want to be that. I want that. No. None of you say, or none of you, and I hope you don't say this, you'd be like, yeah, I know that says it's Jesus, but he's actually talking to me. It's actually about me. God's saying, I'm the beloved Son that was well pleased. You don't read it that way. You read that as Jesus as the King of Israel. That's how you read it, because you know that through Jesus being the elected, righteous one, you know that through him and through his life, you will be blessed through his life, right? You all know that. I know that. Through Jesus' obedience as the Son of God, I'm blessed through that. Well, Jesus is simply the head of his people Israel. He's the king of his people Israel. He identifies with his people. He came for them, right? To redeem them. The new covenant is for them, to change them. So just take that same way to understand that you don't try to become Jesus, or you don't say that's actually not about Jesus, whatever. The same way that you do that with his baptism, do the same thing with the election of Israel. You don't have to say, well, actually, that's me, there. That's me. This is me. You don't have to do that. You can be blessed through God's blessing through Israel. I think that's very, very important. This idea of, I'm going to choose you and bless you, Israel, so that you'll be a blessing to the nations, it's not just found in Genesis and 12. God repeats it to Abraham after the whole Isaac episode in Genesis 22. He repeats it, in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Then he repeats it to Isaac, his son. Isaac, just like your father Abraham, I'm going to bless you and your descendants, and through you, all the nations. And then not just Isaac, but to Jacob. Do you get the pattern here? I could give you the references, right? And to Jacob, he says the same thing. Look, I'm choosing you, just like I chose your father Abraham and your father Isaac. I'm choosing you, blessing your family, your specific offspring, to be a blessing to all the world. It's just constantly throughout. So don't think in your mind, God likes Israel more than me. It's like, no. Israel is functionally the firstborn that blesses the world, that God's blessing the world through. And I think that's very important for us to grapple with. So therefore, if you are not a Jew in this room, then this is not you here in verse 9, and that's okay. That's okay. Now let's keep going, because there's more coming. Let's keep going. Verses 15 through 18. Are we tracking? I don't want to just be like, if I'm already not tracking, then there's no point in going further. Okay, I got some thumbs up, and I got it. Okay, here we go. Verses 15 through 18. What is Israel's response? Right? Because so far, all we've heard about is the faithfulness of God, all the ways that he's just loved Israel, provided for them, and everything. But we've already heard at the very beginning of verse 5 that they've started to deal corruptly with him. So now we begin to see the evidence, right? The evidence. We've talked about this. I could tell about all the characteristics, but what's the evidence? The story, history tells you the evidence. So finally, we get to see the evidence of why Israel began to scorn God, their crooked and twisted generation. So look at verse 15. But Jeshurun, which is another name for Israel. We've had Jacob, right? That's the name for Israel. Now we have Jeshurun. But Jeshurun grew fat, and he kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. Now we begin to see the character of Israel. Even though God did all this to them, look how they reacted. When they began to experience the blessings of God, gorging themselves, remember, we want meat. God says, okay, I'll give you meat to eat. So he gives them the quail. Then they begin throwing up the quail, right? They gorged themselves. They did not receive it with gratitude. They received it as a right. And they began to scoff the rock of his salvation, right? They began to criticize God. You brought us out here just to blah, 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 right? They begin to criticize in that sense. And then verses 16 through 18, they stirred him, that's God, to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. Do you remember the golden calf incident? How ridiculous was that, right? You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. So see what happens. They exchanged their God for foreign gods. The gods that were allotted to the nations. They took them instead. And they thus broke covenant with God. So what happens with God? God was thus stirred to jealousy. Do you see that in verse 16? Stirred to jealousy. He was provoked to anger. Now, rhetorically, I'll say this. What do you think? Do you think God deserves to be stirred to jealousy and provoked to anger? Absolutely, that's the right response. Can you imagine if God just sat by and said, oh, I guess my people are going to go over there. Okay, cool. It's like, no, you're mine, right? We've talked about this. Jealousy is actually, now there can be selfish jealousy, but jealousy is actually an indication of faithfulness. If my wife, not putting my wife in a bad light, I'll put myself in a bad light for the sake of my wife. Let's say I start going off and seeing other ladies, right? If my wife doesn't get jealous, that would actually say something about her faithfulness and her loyalty to me. If she's like, oh, all right, well, cool. No, right? And I think I've said it the other way too. I would get jealous. I would get angry. I would be provoked to anger because there's a breach in our covenant and because of my love. So God has the right. If he did not act in jealousy and anger, there would be something wrong with the covenant. There would be something wrong with God. And yet he's provoked to anger. He's provoked to jealousy. So what's the response to this? Verses 19 through 22 gives us the response. God, and this is amazing. Just listen to this. This is powerful. God chooses to do what? Verse 20, hides his face from them. He chooses to hide his face from his people, and he chooses another people. Look at verse 21 with me, because it's so powerful. They have made me jealous with what is no God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols, so I will make them jealous with those who are no people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. Do you see what's going on here? He's reciprocating what they just did. Are you still following? So all the nations with their own gods, Israel and their God. They choose to scorn God and choose the other gods for themselves. So what does God do? He's like, well, if you went from here to go get their gods, I'm going to go up here and choose the foolish nations. I'm going to choose them. I'm going to say something which might surprise some of us, but that right there is the context for your salvation. That right there is actually the context of your salvation. Paul brings this up in Romans 11. You can't read Romans 11 without knowing Deuteronomy 32. That's become very clear to me. Look at Romans, you don't have to go there. Let me just read this. You can trust me that I'm actually reading this out of Romans 11. Paul says this, I ask, did Israel stumble in order that they might fall, like fall to the point of never rising again? By no means. Rather, through their trespass, through their crookedness, through their idolatry, through their whatever, provoking the God to anger, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. The chapter right before, in Romans chapter 10, Paul literally quotes from Deuteronomy 32. But I asked, did Israel not understand? First, Moses says, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation, and a foolish nation I will take, and I'll make you angry. Whether you like it or not, you are that foolish nation. I am that foolish nation that God has extended mercy to provoke his people to jealousy. It's like, what? God, like, no wonder at the end of Romans 11, you read, oh, the depths of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. I mean, like, who would have thought that that would be the context of your salvation? And yet it is. It's amazing. And it's really powerful, and it's humbling. Now, remember, though, from the very get-go, why did God choose Israel? Let's just remember this, because he loved you, right? You're not plan B, so don't take it that way. You're not like, well, Israel's not choosing me, so I'm going to choose you instead. You're plan B. No. From the very get-go, God's plan is to restore and bring about new Eden, right, through his people Israel. But until that day comes, when that final restoration comes about, until that day comes, he is going to cause his people Israel to be provoked to jealousy until the day when they have new hearts and they finally be the nation that he's called them to be, a light to the whole world. Until that day comes, in the midst of that, their disobedience or whatever, he's calling the nations. He's taking people, Acts 15, he's taking people from the Gentiles for his own name's sake before that day comes when Israel will be a blessing to the whole world. He's doing it beforehand. Does that kind of make sense a little bit? Okay. So that's what's going on here. That is the context of our salvation. The God of Israel is currently, even now, before that day comes when he actually restores Israel, he is currently now saving you and me. I'm presuming that most of us are Gentiles here. He's saving you and me and many others of the nations through grace by the redemption found in the blood of Israel's King, Jesus. He's doing that. He's extending that mercy now for us to provoke Israel to jealousy. God says, yes, Israel's my portion. They've rejected me. I'm going to hide from them, and I'm going to open up reconciliation with the world. And he's doing that now with you and with me. Super powerful. Now, though, how deeply, though, does God care about this? Is that a simple thing for him to be like, okay, I'll just, pause on Israel, and I'll just focus on the nations? It's not like that. Look at verse 22, and you can see how much emotion is involved in this. For a fire is kindled by my anger, and it burns to the depths of Sheol, and Sheol is figurative for the place of the dead. It devours the earth and its increase and sets on fire the foundations of the mountains. God is not this static sort of being up there, that just follows rules or whatever according to his will. It's like he's a personal being, and he has emotions. And this whole process has grieved him to his core, that his people would mock him and walk away from him. And yet you see in the midst of that, this beauty of his grace and mercy stretched out to the other nations before that day comes. And we are the recipients of that reconciliation. Now we get to the next section, verses 23 through to 27. In addition to hiding from Israel, provoking them to jealousy with other people, you and me, God is going to do this with Israel. Verse 23, I will, this is God speaking, heap disasters upon them. And then he goes on in the next few verses to explain in detail what these disasters are going to be. And they are earthly, tangible disasters. Earthly woes, arrows, hunger, pestilence, sickness, the enemy. Why? Is this God's unhinged, jealous wrath? No. It is simply what he said would happen within their covenant just a few chapters earlier when he gave the curses that would come upon them if they were unfaithful to God. So this is not, I just want to make sure that it's not like, I am burning with jealousy, that's not what's going on here. He's saying, he is burning with jealousy, but what he's doing with this hunger, plague, pestilence, beasts, all of this is in direct correlation with the justice of God in that he's only giving them what he told them and what they agreed upon in the covenant. And that's important for us to grasp here. It's not unhinged anger, sinful anger. This is according to the covenant curses. And then, in amazing honesty, which is just crazy, God goes as far as to actually desire his firstborn's utter annihilation. Look at verse 26. I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will wipe them from human memory. But he doesn't. And it's not because he found a little part in him that says, actually, they are kind of cute, It's like your toddler, like, oh, but you're kind of cute. Like, I kind of still want to. It's not because of that. Why? Why does God choose not to wipe them out? I would have said this, verse 27, had I not feared provocation from the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is triumphant, it was not the Lord who did all this. His point is this. This is chastisement upon my people. This is discipline, fatherly discipline upon my people through them. But I don't want them, the other nations, think Egypt, think Assyria, think Babylon. I don't want them to think that they're able to sort of squish these people and now they're like, yay, we did it. It's God who wants the glory for his name's sake for disciplining his people. Remember when the golden calf episode happens, Moses is up on the mountain and God says to Moses, oh no, Moses, things are not going well down there. You better get down there because they're doing something that's just like, I can't handle it. I'm going to consume them in my wrath. I'm going to take them apart because they've already rejected me and they've created these gods that said, these gods took us out of Egypt. It's like, I'm right here. Like, this is offending me. I'm going to consume them. And Moses says, look, if you do that, guess what Egypt is going to say about you? It's a reputation thing. It's for the glory of his namesake. Egypt is going to say, you saved these people, Israel, just to squish them in the wilderness. But that's not what's going to happen. You're going to bring them into the promised land. You're going to fulfill the promise you gave to Abraham to be a blessing to them. So if you do this, it's not going to be good for your namesake. So that's why here in the text, he goes so far as saying, I'm going to get rid of them, but he says, no, for the sake of my name, for the sake of the promises that I've given, I will not do that. Which takes us back to the very beginning of the song. God is faithful and he is just in all his ways. Always. Verses 28 through 33, we're getting there. This is good. Verses 28 through 33. At this point, Moses gets to one of the key issues with Israel in relation to their covenant with God. Verses 28-29 says this, for they are a nation void of counsel, and there is no understanding in them. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would discern their latter end. His point is this. They do not heed the counsel of my prophets like Moses. They don't actually listen. They think they got it all figured out themselves. Therefore, this is why this is happening to them. Because they lack the sense. They lack the counsel from others. And then he proves this by basically saying, how could one have chased 1,000 and two have put 10,000 to flight unless their rockets sold them and the Lord had given them up? His point is to say this. There were other nations around you that were a lot smaller than you, Israel. You came out big and mighty. You had a big army when you came out of Egypt. There was lots of you because in Egypt they multiplied like crazy. They came out of Egypt like qualified, and there was little nations that kind of came out. Imagine like a little two-person little army against 1 million Israelites, and they come out and throw a spear. Yeah, and all the 1,000 or whatever million Israelites just scream and run off. It's like you did this because God had sold you. He had already given you in to your own fears. You don't understand. You don't understand. Even the nations and their own gods concede. They actually agree that your God is stronger. That's what he says. They even concede that Israel's rock is better than their rock. And then we get to verses 34 to 42. Ultimately, when it comes to the discipline of God upon his people and the whole world, Vengeance is not in any one person's hand, it's actually in God's hand. And we read that in verses 34, 35, is not this laid up in store with me, sealed up in my treasuries? Vengeance is mine. Right? This is quoted, Romans 12, other places. Vengeance is mine. Recompense is mine. It's not your job, it's not my job. It's the God of Israel's job to bring vengeance. Remember, his character, though, this is not unhinged vengeance. This is faithful and just in regards to the covenant that he made with Israel. But then we get to something powerful. In verse 36, we finally get to this incredible statement that confirms previous promises that were already given to Israel, because God always keeps his promises. Look at verse 36. For the Lord, Yahweh, that is the personal name for the God of Israel, for Yahweh will vindicate his people, and he will have compassion on his servants. Okay. We've just read horrors of the curses that Israel is going to experience. And then you get to this verse where it says, according to the promise of God, God is going to vindicate his people. He's going to vindicate that crooked and twisted generation. He's going to have compassion on his servants. In the same way that a prodigal son or daughter today, as far prodigal as they might get, a father never loses his love for them. God loves his people Israel. He loves them. Yes, he said, I'm going to wipe them out, but he loves them. I can feel the same way with my kids sometimes. But he loves them. Their long history of covenant curses based on their disobedience and their infidelity to the covenant that God made with them. And this isn't just in Scripture, by the way. This is, for the last 2,000 years, the Jews have faced countless forms of covenant curses upon them in grisly, gnarly ways. You do your own history, and you will see the amount of bloodshed that Israel has faced, even up to this day. But that's not the final word. Even though the population of Israel today is like whatever, how much percent in the whole world, they will never be fully blotted out because of God's covenant promises and because God is faithful to his promises. He will vindicate his people and he will show them compassion. In Isaiah 25, it's a beautiful prophetic picture of the future. I've read it before, and I want to read this because there's a section of it that specifies this, which is beautiful. In verse 6 of Isaiah 25, on this mountain, which mountain is this? Mount Zion, Jerusalem. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food full of marrow, of aged wine, well refined. This is, remember when Jesus says, people from east, west, north, and south are going to come to the table and dine with Abraham. This is the feast. And we all get to join in it if you believe. That's what he's referring to here. Verse 7, and he, God, will swallow up on this mountain. This is where the epicenter is of the world. He will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. And what is that covering? What is that veil that keeps all nations from experiencing the glory of God? It's death because of sin. He will swallow up death forever. And the Lord will wipe away tears from all faces. Now, up to this point, we're like, this sounds great. But then listen to this. And this can bring, it's emotional, it can bring tears. The Lord will wipe away tears from all faces, and the reproach of his people. Who's he speaking of here? Israel. The reproach of his people he will take away from all the earth. No longer will Israel be the mockery of the world. He's going to take away that reproach. And people from all nations, think of people from Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen and Iran coming and saying, you are the people of God. It's like, no way, that can't happen. Everything is possible with God, and he's going to be true to his promises. That's his promise. He's going to take away the reproach of his people forever. Deuteronomy 4, listen to this, another just quick one. When you, this is Moses saying this to Israel, when you are in tribulation And all these things come upon you in the latter days. What things? The covenant disobedience, the curses that are going to come upon you that he's just been singing about in Deuteronomy 32. When all these things come upon you in the latter days, you will return to the Lord your God and you will obey his voice. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not leave you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them. He's not going to forget it. I love it. Think of the prodigal son story. The dad's there, waiting for his son. It's not like, well, it's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Okay, my son's done. He's gone. Let's just focus on the other son now. He's out there waiting. God's going to have mercy upon his people. And you have to believe that. It's so critical. We're almost there. As that last passage just said, in that great tribulation, the timing of this compassion, the timing of this vindication is important because we live in a linear history, right? Things happen in order. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, right? The timing of this vindication of Israel and this compassion that Israel is going to experience from their God is going to happen at that time of the great tribulation, right? Verse 36, when he sees that their power is gone and there is none remaining bond or free. When they're taken into the other nations and they're taken captive, and it's going to be greater than even the Holocaust, the extreme judgment that's going to come upon Israel. It's going to be deep and serious. Jesus says in Matthew 24 that it's going to be a great tribulation like nothing that's ever come before and nothing that's ever going to come again. That's the timing of it. Then to vindicate God, though, himself, he asks Israel in that moment, okay, guys, reach out to the gods that you trusted in instead. See if they will help you, and they're going to quickly find that they don't do anything. Their own strength, their own arm of the flesh, which is a God in itself, will not do anything for them. Their own political abilities, their own everything will not help them in that day. In contrast, though, the God of Israel, in contrast to their gods that they're going to try to seek help for in that day of calamity, in contrast to that, God vindicates himself by saying this about himself in verse 39. See now that I, even I, am he. And there is no God beside me. I am God of gods and Lord of lords, he says in Deuteronomy 10. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. And there is none that can deliver out of my hand. None of your gods can do any of that. I'm the God that does all that. I'm God of gods. I'm Lord of lords. The God of Israel is above all gods, reigning over all in the highest heaven. Nothing can thwart him from what he will do. We ought to tremble under this God, this description of this God. And what I love about this, though, it hints at the future resurrection and restoration of Israel. I kill, but I also make what? Alive. I wound and I heal. In the book of Daniel, you read this in the beginning of chapter 12. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never been since there was a nation till that time. This is referring to that same time of Israel's chastisement. But at that time your people shall be delivered. Who's he talking to? Israel. Everyone whose name shall be found written in the book, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. They will be alive. They will be healed. Some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Okay, so what? Look at verse 43, and this is how we're going to end here. Rejoice with him, O heavens. Rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people. Bow down to him, all gods, for he avenges the blood of his children and takes vengeance on his adversaries. He repays those who hate him and cleanses or atones for his people and his land. If you are waiting for yourself in this song, here you are again. You showed up earlier when God said, I'm going to make Israel jealous by choosing these foolish people. You're there, but now you're here. Rejoice, all Gentiles, with the people of Israel, for this promise of restoring Israel, because the blessing that he's going to bless Israel with is going to become life from the dead for the entire world. Blessing will come through Israel. The nations are to rejoice because God's promised vengeance on Israel's enemies and God's promised future restoration and cleansing of Israel is going to bring a blessing to them as well. This cleansing, which wasn't fully understood back then, is going to be ultimately through God's Messiah, Jesus, our Savior. He provided the means of atonement for Israel, ultimately, but also for all the nations. In fact, God's judgment and atonement, specified here in verse 43, are going to come through the agent of Jesus. It's going to be accomplished through that. So there's the song. Here's the three essentials things, and then we're going to sing a song and take communion together. When we read this song, there's three things that I think are going to be so important that will be produced in us for our sake of our discipleship. Number one is this. This song induces humility, not only for Israel, but for us Gentiles. It induces humility. The Christian faith is not all about Isaac. It's not all about Jesus loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. There's aspects of that that's true. But it's not revolved around us. And that's okay. God chose a people, Israel, as a special inheritance to bless the world through. And we're in the mechanism of that salvation right now, and it's not finished. It's not all about me. The world does not revolve around me and this special relationship I have with God. Now, praise God, I have a special relationship with Him. Bless God that through my faith in Jesus, I have been reconciled with God and I have peace with God through what He has done for me. That is true, and I say yes and amen. But this induces a humility. I don't sustain the root, Paul says. Paul says the root sustains you. I'm a branch grafted into the blessing of Israel. Any moment He could take that branch off. So remember the kindness and severity of God. I don't ever want to look with pride upon unbelieving Israel. Ever. But I want to respect them. And I never want to be a part of God's tool of vengeance upon them at all. Because it says in verse 43 that God will have vengeance on Israel's enemies. I don't want to be in that camp at all. I just want to be there to serve them and love them as God's firstborn and as the people that will bring blessing to me through their Messiah, Jesus. It's not all about me. Let's not be arrogant. The second thing that this song does, induces in us, is it gives us a framework for our discipleship. Our restoration and our glory, our future glory as sons and daughters of God that are going to inherit the kingdom of God and live forever on a new heavens and a new earth, that resurrection, that glory is totally wrapped up in God's covenant with Israel. You can't separate it. It's totally wrapped up. That day of resurrection is going to be once He's finished with His people Israel. That's when that day comes. It totally revolves around Israel, fully. And the last thing, so it provides a framework, and the last thing is this. This whole song gives us an opportunity to rejoice. Moses says in verse 43, "Rejoice, Gentiles, with His people." Rejoice that God is not going to leave Israel alone in the midst of that trial, but He's going to redeem them. Rejoice in that because their redemption is going to mean salvation for the whole world. And you get to partake with them as fellow heirs, with Jesus as your King as well in the new heavens and the new earth. Rejoice. Paul literally quotes verse 43 of Deuteronomy 32 in Romans chapter 15, and he's writing to Gentiles and say, look, Jesus came to confirm these promises that we just read about of the future restoration of Israel. Jesus came to confirm those promises to Israel. And so that His mercy would be extended to you Gentiles. Therefore, rejoice, Gentiles, with His people Israel, and let your hope of His future redemption of Israel be the source of a filling of joy and peace in you. I'm literally quoting Romans 15:13. You can look it up. You may have a filling of joy and the filling of peace and have hope in what's to come. That filling of joy and filling of peace and hope is not ambiguous. It's not just like, oh, give me joy and peace. It's related to the covenant with Israel. It kind of blows my mind. I'm like, wow. Before we take communion, and to lead us into communion, I want to give us a model of a Gentile in the Bible that I believe models for us what it looks like to rejoice with Israel for Israel's salvation and partake with Israel in the glory of God. Because there's a character which might be like, what? But I came across this when I was reading through Exodus, and it just astounded me. I was like, this guy is the model for us Gentiles, and his name is Jethro. Remember Jethro? Jethro, Moses' father-in-law? Okay, not a Jew. This is incredible. I just like this. Just astounds me. This is in Exodus, and then this is going to lead into communion. This is in Exodus, Leviticus. Where am I here? Leviticus, Exodus. This is in Exodus chapter 18. Moses brings Israel out, right? Strong and mighty arm from Israel, right? He brings them out. Jethro hears about it and says, well, I've got your wife and your kids here. I'm going to bring your wife and your kids to you, right? And this is what it says. This is just, I don't know. Maybe it's not going to come across like this to you, but it does to me. It's amazing. Then Moses, so they meet, right? And they're like, oh, they're just all, what do? They bow down, they kissed each other. It's a form of that time, just like, reunion. Verse 8 of Exodus 18. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. So you have Moses, the Jew, telling Jethro, who's not a Jew, all what God has done for Israel's salvation. He's explaining to him the hardship, but the redemption. And Jethro, I love this, and Jethro got jealous and said, I wish I could be there. No. And Jethro rejoiced. He rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Do you see what Jethro's doing here? He's not saying, well, I wish I could walk through a cool sea with I wish I could experience that. It's like, he doesn't do that. He just rejoices. Think of the humility there. He just says, praise God for what he's done for you. Jethro said, blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of Egyptians. Now I know, this is Jethro speaking, that the Lord is greater than all gods. See, Jethro didn't have to experience it for himself to know that God was God of all gods. He just had to hear the testimony of God's dealings with Israel to know and to bless God. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people, and Jethro, this is where we'll meet into communion, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. Who's doing this? Jethro. He's bringing the burnt offering. He's bringing the worship to God. And Aaron, Moses' brother, came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. Jethro didn't experience anything that Israel did, and yet here's Jethro at the table with the Jews before God, participating in communion. Now, did Jesus die for you? This isn't a trick question. Yes. Is his covenant for you too? Yes. None of this denies any of that at all. But it puts all of it into the context of his greater framework of restoring the whole world through his covenant with Israel. And I believe that we would do ourselves very good in our discipleship if we took on that same Jethro humility and Jethro rejoicing and Jethro participation with Israel and Israel's God. And we get to do that now with communion. Jesus has invited us around a table before that final day. He's invited us around a table, and if there were any fellow Messianic believers, Jewish believers that believe in Jesus, they would join with us too. And we would all join together in anticipation of that final day, where we will sit beside Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the Isaiah 25 banquet with wine and rich meat. This is in anticipation of that. And as we eat of the bread and as we drink of the juice, we remember, my goodness, the King of Israel, Jesus himself, has extended his mercy beyond Israel and has given it to me. And through his broken body and his shed blood, my sins are forgiven. All of my silliness and following the other gods of the nations, I've repented of, and I have faith in Jesus and what he has done on the cross, and I have the hope of eternal life, where I get to walk and experience the blessings of Israel. As Paul says in Colossians 1, I get to share in the inheritance of the saints. I get to share in it, just like Jethro shared in this meal. Let's pray.